right, can everybody see the slide with the vial of vaccine on it?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. All right, so I am Jason Menshofer with the Mercer County Health District and also of Dr. Reginald Finger's Research Methods 2 class at in the Masters of Public Health program at Indiana Wesleyan University. And here at the health department, as you know, we are anticipating the arrival of our first first doses of COVID-19 vaccine here in Mercer County within the week. And as we have started reaching out to different segments of the population who are eligible to receive that vaccine initially, we have become aware that people have some concerns, of course, about this vaccine. It's something new, it's something largely unknown. And in response to those concerns, I decided to put together this presentation to address some of those and to put some basic factual information out on how vaccines work and what we expect from this COVID-19 vaccine in particular. So there are a variety of types of vaccines. We'll start general here just to get you up to speed on some of those types. I chose a couple here that are pretty common that you've probably all seen or heard of and that you maybe have taken yourselves. The first one on the list here is live attenuated vaccines, which contain a weakened version of a virus or a bacteria, but it is a live virus or bacteria. And not to insult anyone's intelligence, but when I was doing my own research for this, I read that and I thought, I don't know if I remember what attenuated means. And I looked it up and it was just basically weakened and lower strength. So this would be the introduction of an actual virus into the body. Inactivated vaccines also contain a virus or a bacteria, but it is one that was killed during the production of the vaccine. An example of a live attenuated vaccine is the MMR, or measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, which is one that's commonly provided here at the health department. And an example of an inactivated vaccine would be the polio vaccine. So an mRNA vaccine, messenger RNA vaccine, is what the two best known versions of the COVID-19 vaccine are. And these vaccines introduce a piece of RNA or genetic material into the body that instructs cells to produce a protein that is the same protein that's on the outside of the COVID virus. And that protein then stimulates an immune response within the human body. And this is all done without actually introducing a virus to the body. So vaccines essentially imitate an infection in the body without causing illness. So we're introducing something into the body that the body is going to recognize that doesn't belong because of something called an antigen, which is a foreign substance that induces an immune response within the body. So we're putting a bacteria or a virus or a piece of genetic material into the body that has antigens that are going to stimulate the production of antibodies and things called T lymphocytes. And those are what causes the immune response, what fights off foreign materials, foreign things in the body. Now, this can sometimes result in minor symptoms that might seem a little bit like an infection, but are much milder. And at the end of this process, the body is left with a memory. These T lymphocytes are what forms the memory that causes your body to recognize a similar intruder next time it happens. So in the case of this, the COVID vaccine rather, we're introducing this messenger RNA that tells your body how to make the protein that is similar to the protein that's found on the surface of the coronavirus. Your body produces the antibodies that correspond and can fight off that protein. And then when your body happens to get infected with a virus that contains that same protein, those antibodies will fight it off. So one of the concerns that we hear quite often, and it might be a concern that some of you share as well, about this vaccine, these vaccines coming out now, is that they have been developed so quickly. And there's a lot of truth to that. That does not mean that the process has been done without taking into account safety and making an effective vaccine, but it has happened pretty quickly. I'm going to walk you through a timeline of a handful of highlights in the development of this vaccine. Before I do that, I'm going to ask you all to please pause or please mute your phones or your computers. I'm getting some background noise from somebody. So January 11th of 2020, keep in mind all of these dates are going to be 2020 dates because this has all happened so quickly. The genetic sequence of the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19 infection, was identified by scientists in China. Just 25 days later, on February 7th, a company called Moderna developed the first clinical batch of their vaccine called mRNA 1273. And pretty much everything that you hear me talk about from this point of the presentation on is going to be pertinent to the Moderna vaccine, because that is what we expect to receive here at the health department, and what we will be initially administering to people who we give the vaccine to. A lot of the information will apply to other vaccines as well, but anytime you hear specifics, we're talking about the Moderna vaccine. So I told you February 7th, the first batch of vaccine was completed. And by April 16th, just a little over 2 months later, participants were enrolled in the phase 1 clinical study. We're going to go into more detail on clinical studies shortly, but this is a multi-level, multi-phase kind of gradually growing study that helps to determine and ensure the efficacy and the safety of a new vaccine. So you see around the 1st of June, the phase 2 clinical trial begins, and just before August, the phase 3 clinical study begins. And then fast forward to the middle of November, Moderna is reporting their preliminary data from, I believe, their phase 3 clinical study indicates the efficacy of their vaccine is 94.5%. And of interest to me and people in public health who will be administering this vaccine, they also announced at the same time that their vaccine has a longer shelf life under refrigeration than some other vaccines that are under consideration. We are told that once the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine is thawed, that we can maintain it refrigerated for up to 30 days, as long as we stay within acceptable temperature ranges. And that helps for planning to be able to get these doses of vaccine distributed to the people who need them in an amount of time that will allow us to do so without wasting vaccine. And I do have one more date that's hiding behind a window here, so I'll collapse that. December 17th, yesterday, actually I should have updated this, the mRNA 1273 vaccine produced by Moderna was considered for emergency use authorization approval by the FDA, or by an advisory committee at the FDA. That advisory committee did recommend that approval, and we're expecting that that could happen as soon as today or tomorrow, that the vaccine will be officially approved by the FDA for emergency use authorization, which is not the same thing as a final approval. So a little bit more about the vaccine development. The two vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, that you've heard about in the news are both mRNA vaccines, but there are other vaccines that are in development for COVID-19 that are live attenuated virus or inactivated viruses or other types as well. One of the things that makes this relatively new RNA technology attractive is that it has a greater potential to develop a vaccine quickly in a situation just like this. It was basically made for a pandemic situation where we need a solution and we need it as quickly as we can, and we need it to be safe. Some of these other vaccine types in the past have taken over 10 years, actually on average, to develop. So it's pretty amazing what's been done just this year with the development of these mRNA vaccines. Even if the technology allows for quick development of a vaccine, there's still a huge need for strong cooperation and collaboration between many different types of parties, between the manufacturers and the funders and the researchers and regulators, the government, public health. You know, usually you think about a process like this and there are a lot of bureaucratic hoops to jump through, applications, documentation, lots of details that need to be ironed out. Excuse me. And, you know, those things don't just happen overnight. Generally, there has to be a lot of collaboration and probably a lot of extra hours put in to compress the amount of time that it took to get to where we are today. So a little bit more about clinical trials. You can see in this graphic here how, you know, I talked about phase 1, 2, and 3 trials that are either completed or underway for these vaccines, particularly this Moderna vaccine that I'm talking about today. And you can see that with each phase, the study broadens out into a larger group of people and maybe studies things in more detail as well. So again, right now, phase 3 trials are ongoing with the Moderna vaccine, and those trials have yielded enough information to allow for application to the FDA for this emergency use authorization, and to give the people at the FDA enough confidence that they are able to adequately weigh the risks versus benefits to go ahead and make a decision on this. A concern that many people have expressed here locally is that we don't know what long-term effects may come with this vaccine. And that is where phase 4 comes in. And unfortunately, it's just the nature of the situation that we're in that, you know, if people are interested in getting the vaccine now, they're just going to have to do that, and without knowing what all the long-term effects are. And if people aren't comfortable with that, then they'll have to wait until we get further down the line and either have results from phase 4 clinical studies, or maybe some people are going to be satisfied to watch other people that get the vaccine and see how it works out for them. But phase 4 really gets us into long-term effectiveness and being able to determine if there are any long-term safety concerns with the vaccine. I think it's worth mentioning that you know, we are starting to learn some things about potential long-term effects of the COVID-19 infection. And so I think that's one of the things that has to come into play for each person's own decision of risks versus benefits. You know, people express concern as well about side effects of the vaccine. Well, yeah, there are some side effects, but there are also some fairly serious symptoms that can come with actually being infected with COVID-19. So those are things that need to come into play as people make their decisions. So just to give you a handful of details on these clinical trials, and so you can see on what order of magnitude that they're increasing the number of people that they're enrolling as they progress through this scenario. Phase one, Moderna's phase one clinical trial involved 45 healthy adults between 18 and 55 years of age. This was at the outset of the phase one study. And later on, they expanded that out to include 60 more people in two different cohorts ranging from 56 years of age up beyond 71 years of age. I'm not sure how old the oldest person was. So in this first trial, the researchers are administering 2 vaccinations to each participant 28 days apart. And part of what they're doing here is trying to determine what the optimal dose is. So these people are actually broken into groups and given vaccine in 3 different doses from 25 micrograms, 100 micrograms, and 250 micrograms. In that initial group, that would have been 15 people in each group. And the results from that phase one trial that we have to date indicate that a higher dose leads to more production of antibodies, which is, I'm no vaccine expert, but I think we could expect, a lot of us might expect it to work that way. The second dose also proved increased the immune response to put up a stronger defense against the virus. And as we might also expect, there were some adverse effects or side effects associated with the vaccine. And those are pretty typical vaccination side effects, including being tired, having chills or fever, headache, muscle aches, some irritation or pain or inflammation around the site of the injection. And as you can see, those were experienced by about half of the participants in this trial. And again, like I said before, side effects are generally a concern or a concern that we hear fairly frequently. But it's worth remembering that these minor effects, like I just talked about here with this phase one trial, are actually a natural sign that your body is reacting to the vaccine in the way that you want it to, so that it will react to the real virus correctly if you are exposed to the virus. So in phase two, we went from about 100 people out to about 600 healthy adults. And those are broken into 2 age groups, as you can see, 300 people between 18 and 55 and 300 who are over 55. They were also given vaccinations 2 days apart. And in this case, they were given either a 50 microgram dose, a 100 microgram dose, or a placebo, which is basically a saline shot, which is designed to do nothing in terms of immune response, but it gives a point of comparison to be able to tell how the vaccine is working. And unfortunately, you see the bottom half of this slide is kind of empty. That's because I did not have any luck finding phase two data. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Unfortunately, I ran a little bit short on time putting this together. So phase three, now we've gone from 600 healthy adults to 300,000 healthy adults, still administering 2 vaccinations 28 days apart. And we've gone down to a single dosage of the actual vaccine, and that's 100 micrograms. And of course, the placebo for comparison. And the interim results that I was able to find for the phase 3 trial indicate 94.5% efficacy, as I mentioned before, of the vaccine. And I thought it was interesting to learn a little bit about how they do these things and where the placebo comes into play. So out of these 30,000 healthy adults and the amount of time that this data was being gathered, 95 of them developed cases of COVID-19 infection. And of those 95, 90 of those were in the placebo group, which is the group that didn't actually receive the Moderna vaccine. And only 5 of those were in that vaccinated group of 15,000 people. So again, concerns center often around safety and side effects associated with this vaccine. And as I mentioned before, generally side effects appear to be consistent with the flu shot and other vaccines. Although no one's going to argue that more information is needed to really know where we're at with this vaccine long term. And one of the things you notice if you read some of the research and the publications that come out of these clinical trials is that they're pretty careful about not making any claims that they can't back up with data. So you might have heard this week that the Pfizer vaccine is only available for people 16 years old and older. And that's not because anything has been done or anything has happened to indicate that it's not safe for people below the age of 16. But the reason for that limit is that the clinical trials are limited to people who are 16 or older. So they're not going to extrapolate outside of that category and say that it's safe for younger people until there's been time to do more trials. And that I assume will come into play in phase 4. Now, similarly, we've been told that the vaccine is not recommended for pregnant women. And again, the reason for that is not because there's been a problem with pregnant women being vaccinated. It is because pregnant women were not included in the clinical trials. So I think that gives us a little bit of a look into the way these things are done, and that yes, it's happened quickly, but we can see a scientific progression of how these things are being tested out, and that the companies appeared not to be overstepping what they actually know to assure us of levels of safety that haven't been demonstrated yet. That's what I had prepared for you today. So at this point, I'd like to know if anybody has any questions.
Jason, any chance you can share on us, why do they do 2 shots? Why not just the 1?
That's an excellent question. I believe that second shot's basically a booster, and wish I had one of my nurses here next to me to answer that question a little bit better than I do. But I believe it gives your body a chance to, when you get that first shot, to create that immune response, and then after a period of time, to re-inject that same material that stimulated that response to stimulate more response. I think just strengthens the immune response. That's in very layman's terms. Unfortunately, I'm not an immunization specialist.
Jason, this is Susan. You got that right.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan.
Jason, I have a question. If they've already had COVID, I'm getting asked if they would need the vaccine.
Well, that falls in the category of we don't really know enough to say otherwise at this point. So, it does stand to reason that there was some natural immunity acquired from having the infection. But the guidance we're getting from the state, and I believe also from the CDC, is that the fact that somebody has had a prior infection with COVID-19 does not remove them from a priority list or anything like that. So if they want the vaccine and they're healthy and they're not currently infected or quarantined because of exposure, and if we are in a phase of the vaccine administration where they're eligible to receive the vaccine, we can give it. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Jason, so I'm understanding that the standard dosage being administered is 100 micrograms. Is that correct? Is that what has been settled on?
That is what the that is what the dosage is on the Moderna vaccine.
Correct. And
I believe
is the booster the same?
yes, I believe the booster, the first and second shots, I believe are both the same. I've not heard anything to say otherwise that there's any difference. I believe everything that all the vaccine that we get will be interchangeable for first or second dose. There is an exception to that. I should say in the beginning, that's how it's going to be because we're only receiving the Moderna vaccine. But if and when we get to a point where we are receiving vaccines from different manufacturers, those will not be interchangeable, at least from what we're told now. So that brings up an important point too. I mean, we also are going to have people, I'm not sure about this week, but I know early next week, there are going to be some vaccinations given in some of our local long-term care facilities. And from everything we've been told, that would be Pfizer vaccine. So if somebody happens to work at one of those facilities, they get their first vaccine, for whatever reason, they can't be there on the day of the second dose, or they quit that job and go to a different job or something like that, we won't be able to administer that second dose because we won't have the vaccine that matches up with what they got for their first dose.
Jason, I had a question about the survey that you guys were doing to see interest in vaccination. It's a technical thing. Are you guys leaving a cookie? Because my son is in the first group because he's in a congregate living situation. So I responded for him that yes, we want. And then I responded for me and it wouldn't let me take the survey because I finally had to change computers. So just an FYI, if you guys are leaving cookies on devices, only one person per device can answer that survey.
Okay, well, that's a good thing to know. I will have to look into that. If I'm leaving a cookie trail, it's not intentional. It's probably something that happens on the backside of SurveyMonkey that's above and beyond my comprehension level at this point.
Right, and it makes sense because it's a survey that doesn't have names or birth dates associated with it. So the only tracking you would have is the IP address. But fortunately, we have all kinds of devices at our house, so we can all respond, but not everybody has that.
That's good to know. I appreciate that. And incidentally, we have received pretty favorable response on that public survey. I mean, I think we've only got maybe somewhere between 450 and 500 responses. And unfortunately, it's in two different surveys because we tweaked the way we did the zip code thing. But anyway, we're showing somewhere between 70 and 80% of the people that are completing that survey are interested in the vaccine. Now, those are people that are on our distribution list that get our periodic updates and that are following our Facebook page. So they're probably, people that have a more favorable view of that kind of thing than some others that may not anyway. So I'm not trying to say that's representative of our entire county, but it was encouraging to see that we have that kind of interest because at this point, we are expecting to receive 200 doses next week. And of the different people who fall into that phase 1A right now, I think we've only potentially got about half of our doses used up in terms of people who have responded that they are interested in getting the vaccine right away. before I stray too far off of the presentation here, does anybody have any other questions about what we've talked about regarding the vaccine?
Jason, do you know the shelf lives of the Pfizer and also the Moderna vaccines?
I can't tell you the shelf life of the Pfizer vaccine off the top of my head because I've been more focused on the Moderna here recently. I can tell you with a pretty high level of certainty on the Moderna vaccine that we can maintain it frozen within a specific temperature range for, I believe, 6 months. And once it's thawed, we can keep it at refrigeration temperature for 30 days. Once it's brought out to administer and held at room temperature, we have 12 hours to use it up. And once it comes in a 10-dose, multi-dose vial, like you've probably seen, there might have even been a picture of one in this. Actually, that's probably what this is, where it has the vial with the kind of rubber membrane or silicone, whatever that material is at the top that they poke the needle through and draw up a single dose out of this vial. Once that vial has been penetrated, we have 6 hours to use it up. And I don't know, maybe Susan can jump on and tell you the shelf life of the Pfizer vaccine.
Jason, you mentioned that we're getting 200 doses next week. I know my wife. Do you have any idea what Mercer County is projected to receive dosages, say, in the next 30 days? Any idea, or do we know what's coming after that?
Not really, not with any certainty. And I'll tell you, Don, I missed part of your question somewhere around. It sounded like you said something maybe about your wife, and then I saw your lips moving and didn't hear anything until you asked if we knew what we were going to see in the next 30 days.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like my wife, Jason. Sees my lips moving. No, what I said was my wife was scheduled for her shot, her vaccination next week. So, and I was just wondering, if we had any idea what, if we had any idea how many doses are actually coming to the county. And I know it's real early to ask that question, but, because we don't know what the production is going to be essentially over that period of time. But, it's, I'm just curious as to, the rapidity in which we will have our county citizens inoculated against this disease. So.
Sure. Well, Don, there's a lot of uncertainty on that, partly because of supply, but and because so much information, or because information is changing on a daily basis. What we've been led to expect is, again, this is all contingent on the emergency use authorization happening in the next couple of days, that we should have 200 doses is what we were told was our allotment for the first shipment. Mostly based on population, I believe. And we were told not long ago to expect weekly shipments. I keep wanting to say till the end of the year, but we're almost there. So I think it might go a little bit beyond that. But the quantities of those shipments are not known to us right now. And another thing that I'm interested to see play out is how we're going to navigate through these different phases of eligibility for vaccine. And I haven't heard a clear answer on that, but I get the feeling that it might be something that's done on a fairly statewide level, to where, let's say, we've only got maybe 300 people who, just as an example, maybe we've only got 300 people in Mercer County who are interested, that fall into phase 1A, which includes EMS responders and healthcare workers and people who live in congregate care or congregate living facilities, several different categories that are eligible right away. And if we vaccinate everybody who wants the vaccine and nobody else is showing up, it's not real clear to us on whether we need to maybe reallocate or share vaccine to another jurisdiction who still has a need, or whether we can move on into the next phase. Those things are all variables that are going to play into how quickly we can work our way on out to the general population.
Earlier this week in conversation, you shared the no cost for these.
That's correct. And the vaccine itself is free to us, free to you, anybody who gets it. We can, and as far as we know right now, we will be billing insurance for an administration fee to help cover our costs for actually delivering and giving the vaccine, unless there's another funding source that becomes available for that. But having said that, if anybody doesn't have insurance or can't pay for any reason, the vaccine will not be withheld. So we're basically going to recover what we can, but we're going to make sure that our residents are served.
How do you feel your staffing is for administering these vaccines?
I think we're going to be able to use some help, and we have some help. We have some Medical Reserve Corps volunteers. We're working on a memorandum of understanding with the county EMS personnel. We know of at least, I think, 3 of them who are interested in helping administer vaccines, and they're able to do that. There was some sort of I don't even know what it's called, but there was a provision made a month or 2 ago where legally they're able to help with that. And we're looking at other possibilities too. I believe there's a similar possibility with nursing students, maybe from the Lake campus. There are some different options, and there's also, we've been told recently, there's also some additional funding coming next year. I'm not sure how much of that will be available to be used for vaccinations. The other thing, Ken, that's going to come into play is what level of COVID activity we're seeing in the county whenever we're needing to give these vaccines. So, do we have 4 nurses that we can take out to a vaccination clinic and give a bunch of people shots, or do we have to keep a couple of them back at the office to do case interviews because people have tested positive for COVID? So those are all things that are going to need to be worked out. I'm going to try to, unless anybody else has any questions specific to the content of this presentation, I'm going to try to make a clean break here, stop my recording, and then we'll proceed with the rest of our meeting. But I want to give you one more chance if you do have any questions. All right, well, I thank you all for your attention and for bearing with me as I try to provide you with some information and also satisfy a requirement for my education.